from the headquarters of Telesur English in Quito, Ecuador. I'm Carla Gonzalez, and this is From the South. A car bomb has exploded in the Colombian capital, Bogota, killing at least 8 people. The explosion happened at the Santander Police School, and at least 12 other people were wounded. Security forces have cordoned off the area. President Iván Duque was heading for the scene as relatives have arrived to search for their loved ones. The Minister of Defense has called it a terrorist attack, but so far no one has claimed responsibility. Our correspondent Tatiana Portela arrived at the scene just a few minutes before and sent us this report.
At least 5 people are dead, including 3 women, a cadet, and a brigadier. Around 10 other people are seriously wounded. In the last 15 minutes, we have seen 2 ambulances leave the scene here at the Santander Police Academy. Firemen and the Civil Defense Force are also on the scene. As you can see, there is a lot of confusion with vehicles all over the place. We spoke to several people who live close to the school, and they told us that they heard a loud explosion and that a number of houses nearby were damaged here in the southeast of Bogota. We are waiting to hear what the police will be saying. We have just seen a police investigation team arrive and go into the Santander Police Academy. We should point out that the academy was in the process of receiving and promoting a number of cadets. We spoke to the mother of one cadet who had just started the school 2 days ago. She was very worried that her son might be among the dead, but so far no information has been given out about the identities of the victims, so she doesn't know if her son is safe or not. We'll be keeping you up to date as more information comes out about this apparent car bomb. And we should also add that so far no armed group has claimed responsibility for the explosion inside the police academy.
That was Tatiana Portela, and we'll be following this news along the day. Also happening in Colombia, a young campesino was found murdered in front of an army military base in Antioquia. A community peace organization has condemned the killing of Daimer Usuga, saying that the public force and police are responsible for murders in the area because they have allowed paramilitarism to grow out of control. FARC member Pastor Alape Lascarro also took to Twitter to place responsibility on the state for the systematic murders of campesinos. We now go to Mexico. The creation of the National Guard has been approved by the Congress. Our correspondent Pablo Perez brings us the latest from Mexico City.
Well, last night the Congress approved by 362 against 119 votes the constitutional amendment for the creation of the National Guard, a proposal of Andrés Manuel López Obrador's government to present an armed front against the organized crimes, the drug cartels, and also those groups that do the fuel thieving that is one of the biggest problems of Mexico nowadays. And well, this is a very, very criticized decision because people said that this is a way of militarizing Mexico's safety, and there's a lot of evidence on the recent years since the administration of Felipe Calderón and Enrique Peña Nieto that where the army got into national security or policies or policing practices, the indexes of human rights violation raised severely. Well, the administration, Andrés Manuel López Obrador administration, said that this is going to be corrected because there's going to be a focus on human rights defense on this new force that is going to be trained and somehow managed by members of the military and the Navy. But there's still a lot of the discussion being made on the public level about if this is what he promised during his campaign. Well, when he said that he was going to take the troops out of the streets, and well, this amendment is now on the upper house and in the Senate, and they're going to vote if the amendment goes, or it's gonna have to be modified to cover some of the doubts of the general people.
That was Pablo Perez reporting from Mexico. Now we go to other news. Around 30 students were arrested during a demonstration in Sao Paulo against a rise in public transport fares. The protest was called by the Free Fares movement, which played a key role in the huge demonstrations in Brazil in 2013. The police blocked the demonstrators on the Avenida Paulista in the center of Sao Paulo. They then fired tear gas and rubber bullets to disperse the protest.
We were only making our war cry. Nobody was doing anything against the police, but they started throwing bombs at us. Without any reason, they threw tear gas. We were just sitting on the ground and chatting.
Let's go to our correspondent, Brian Mir, with the latest.
Last night in São Paulo, on Avenida Paulista, there was a street protest held against the recent fare increases in public transportation in the city. The protest was mobilized by the MPL, the Movimento Passe Livre, which is made up mostly of students and is a social movement that fights for the right to free universal access to public transportation. Now, they first gained fame in 2013 when they started a series of street protests against public transportation fare hikes that ballooned into the May and June protests of 2013 that hundreds of thousands of people on the street, and was immediately co-opted by conservatives who tried to transform it into an anti-government protest. Okay, so because of that, because of their fame as being powerful protest organizers, whenever they try to form new protests against fare increases, the police clamp down very hard on them, and the police have been militarized very much in the last 5 or 6 years in Sao Paulo. Okay, so from the eyewitness accounts, the police started throwing tear gas at people before the protests even started. They arrested 30 people. According to Jornalistas Livre, one is still being detained. Nevertheless, a group of over 1,000 protesters managed to continue and make it all the way to the end of the planned protest route at the bottom of Consolação Avenue. Brian Mir, Telesur, São Paulo.
Now let's go to Ecuador. A court has ordered the release of 5 former public officials and journalists accused of embezzlement. The public prosecutor's office found no evidence to support the claims. Our correspondent in Quito, Denise Herrera, has the details.
Judge Silvia Sanchez has ordered the release of 5 former employees of the Communication Ministry, popularly known as the COM. According to the judge, there was no strong evidence against them. The workers had been accused of embezzlement. A controller's report reveals the COM's criminal responsibility for expenses and hiring. 2 of the defendants are Marco Antonio Bravo, former Undersecretary of Institutional Media, and Javier Lemos, former Administrative Coordinator.
It looked like they were forced to act after Fernando. We have to obey the law and fight against corruption, and we paid for that circumstance. The decision from the prosecutor's office was arbitrary and without doubt political in nature.
Lamentably, we were in prison for 77 days. There are 2 people that are still there waiting for the process to finish in the same way as it has with us, which is that it reveals the truth. It's good that we're out and we're with our families, but it doesn't feel good to have been in prison.
The legal team defending Marco Antonio Bravo and Jaime Lemos affirmed that political pressure generated by the case meant that the ex-SECOM employees were accused without any legal foundation.
If they want to bring charges against my clients, then they ought to do it without preventive detention. There is no reason to ask for incarceration, and it's terrible to be detained for 75 days. And then at the end, they recognize that there was no participation in the SECOM contracts. It goes against the rule of law. First of all, you investigate. Then if there are charges to be brought, act. That's what should happen. Not prison first, investigate later.
It's a dangerous precedent. The court is jumping to preventative detention as a first course of action. It's a bad precedent to set in the state at a judicial level. There are going to be international consequences for the country.
Judge Silvia Sanchez ruling against the 5 former officials came following the escape of former Communications Secretary Fernando Alvarado, who fled the country in October 2018. The pre-trial hearing for a number of once prominent figures in the ministry is expected to be held on January 23rd, including Fernando Alvarado, former Communications Secretary, Pablo Llanes, former Undersecretary of Communication, Galo Pacheco, former Undersecretary of Institutional Media, and Carlos Bravo of the Gota Sur Production Company. Denise Herrera, Telesur, Ecuador.
Hundreds of members of the migrant caravan spent the night sleeping on the streets of the Guatemalan capital. Despite the freezing cold, Honduran citizens, with children among them, tried to get some rest before continuing their journey towards the Mexican border with the attempts of seeking asylum in the United States. Honduran migrants say that their journey was motivated by the precarious social conditions in their country, as well as the escalating violence. Guatemala's National Immigration Institute has reported that there are 325 children among this latest group, with approximately 100 people from El Salvador joining them as well. Our correspondent Mario Rosales in Guatemala City has more.
Last night, scores of Honduran citizens arrived in Guatemala City, part of the new migrant caravan. They began arriving from early Thursday morning, and they have gathered just in front of this building, which has been aptly called the Migrant House. Since last year, it has provided temporary shelter for hundreds of asylum seekers during this humanitarian crisis. So far, the Guatemalan government has failed to provide any assistance, but its citizens have donated much-needed supplies, such as blankets, coffee, bread, and other food items. And so, members of this new caravan in small groups continue their journey to the Mexican border. Meanwhile, many, including women and young children, continue to arrive in Guatemala. Their goal is to reach the U.S. They're placing their hopes of survival in the hands of Mexico's new government.
That was Mario Rosales from Guatemala. And we have more stories coming up. We'll be back. Welcome back. Detention conditions have deteriorated in Africa and around the world, according to the International Committee of the Red Cross. The president of the ICRC made this assessment. Peter Maurer from the Maca Correction Center in Abidjan. The prison is built for 1,500 inmates, but currently houses 7,000. He said overcrowding is a problem in prisons around the world.
This morning I'm talking to you from Abidjan here. Tomorrow it could be from Conakry, Lomé, Dakar, Central America, or any other context. I would like to point out that one of the most serious problems is related to prison overcrowding and its domino effect on the mental and physical health and well-being of prisoners.
The government in the Ivory Coast has responded to the decision by the International Criminal Court to acquit the former president Laurent Gbagbo. He had been charged with crimes against humanity. The government said it has taken note of the decision by the ICC. The Ivorian Ministry of Justice said if the former leader returns to the country, the courts will decide on his fate. The ICC prosecutor indicated that the decision can be appealed and assured support for the victims.
With regard to Mr. Laurent Gbagbo, I would like to inform you that since 2011, numerous proceedings have been initiated against several persons. And for the rest, I will tell you that I have no specific information on this. When the time comes, if he is in Ivory Coast, the justice system will decide. But for the moment, I can't predict.
Meanwhile, lawyers representing the former Ivorian leader have argued their client should be released following in his acquittal.
Mr. Chairman, the prosecutor and the legal representative of the victims seem to want to ignore this fundamental change, which is the result of your decision yesterday. Laurent Gbagbo is no longer an offender. Laurent Gbagbo was acquitted.
And to other news, life is slowly returning to normal in the capital of Zimbabwe following 3 days of fuel hike protests. Zimbabweans have started to return to the streets in Harare after the violent demonstrations against the government decision to raise the price of gasoline. Scores of civilians, including prominent activists, have been detained following the protests and are expected to appear in court on Thursday to face charges of causing public violence.
Things are beginning to normalize now, so going to work is the only option, otherwise our families will suffer more.
I think things are becoming to be normal as of now, because people are starting to trickle in the city. I think it's starting to normalize.
Zimbabwean activists held a protest in Pretoria, South Africa on Wednesday, calling on the president of Zimbabwe, Emmerson Mnangagwa, to restore internet. The internet shutdown takes place amid protests over price hikes on basic food and fuel. Reports coming out of Zimbabwe say that the government has been clamping down on demonstrations. The Pretoria protesters are also calling for President Mnangagwa to step down. The country has struggled economically since former President Robert Mugabe's departure.
Now as we speak, the reason they've made this shutdown so that they can do their works in the night, in darkness, where nobody is seeing. You will remember very well that on August 1, just after the election, they had the courage to shoot people in front of the international media. What more when there is no media? I'm being told right now that each and every person who tries to take photos or who tries to photograph, even SABC journalists, their cameras are being taken away.
And in Johannesburg, discussions began for an inquiry into the death of a former Rwandan intelligence chief who was murdered in South Africa. Vincent Karegeya was found dead in December 2013 in a hotel suite in Johannesburg. The local court is discussing whether an investigation should proceed. The Karegeya family's legal team argues that there is overwhelming evidence that the murder was politically motivated.
Something happened and we decided not.
It will help them to, even the country, Rwanda would know that they have no right to come and kill the people in the country that is not theirs. It should be a lesson even for Rwandese to stand up for themselves and say this is not the right thing to be done, and there should be sanctions on that country.
Now let's look at what's happening in Latin America. A landslide at a landfill near the Bolivian city of La Paz is threatening local residents' well-being. There are concerns that hazardous waste will enter the water supply and even spill close to homes. Community leaders have said that the black liquid emerging from the landfill is dangerous. Municipal authorities are reportedly making plans to prevent further contamination.
It's a high-magnitude landslide. As you can appreciate, it's too much. Imagine, just beyond the edge where you can see with the cameras, as you can see, there are more cracks beginning to open. And beyond that, residue is leaking out. That black liquid is extremely contaminating.
In Argentina, large crowds marched through Buenos Aires to demand the immediate release of indigenous activist Milagro Sala. Wednesday marked 3 years of detention for Sala, who was sentenced to 13 years in prison on Monday. The march included members of the Tupac Amaru Association, the Association of State Workers, and human rights organizations. They accused the local and national government of persecution.
This government of Morales and Macri came to bring hunger, came to bring unemployment, and that is why Milagro and the rest of the comrades and comrades of the Tupac are prisoners. Because they gave dignity to their people, because they built homes, because they built factories, and they built cultural centers.
We'll take one last break. Stay with us. Welcome back. The son of Press TV anchor Marcieh Hashemi said that he and his siblings have received subpoenas to appear before a grand jury in Washington, D.C. Hashemi, a U.S. citizen working for the Iranian news agency, is currently being detained in Washington. Her eldest son is asking for answers as to why his mother was arrested and said that it is important to look at her line of work. Hashemi made documentaries on Black Lives Matter and is critical of many of the domestic and foreign policies of the U.S. government. Iran's foreign minister has said that the U.S. should immediately release the TV anchor without further delay.
First of all, Mrs. Hashemi is also an Iranian citizen because of the nationality of her husband, her late husband, and that is why we have a right to continue to look after her interests as an Iranian citizen who has been wrongfully imprisoned in the United States. She is a famous journalist. She's done nothing but journalism, and the arrest of Mrs. Hashemi is a very clear affront to freedom of expression, a political abuse of an innocent individual, and I believe the United States should release her immediately without further delay.
The United Nations has said almost 900 people are believed to have died in ethnic violence in the Democratic Republic of Congo in the lead-up to last month's election. The UN said most of the violence occurred in the country's northwest between two ethnic groups. And while the bloodshed was not directly related to the election, reports indicate that tensions increased after the groups backed different candidates. The death toll from Tuesday's terrorist attack at a hotel in Kenya has risen to 21. Authorities had earlier reported that 15 people were killed in Nairobi. Somalia-based militant group Al-Shabaab claimed responsibility for this attack. A statement released by the group said that their main motivation was the decision of the U.S. President Donald Trump to recognize Jerusalem as the capital of Israel.
These are the nationalities of the persons who very sadly lost their lives. 16 Kenyans, 1 Briton, 1 American, and 3 persons of African descent whom we are yet to identify.
The British Labour Party could support a second referendum on Brexit if a no-deal scenario seems likely. Labour leader Jeremy Corbyn says he'll only hold talks with Prime Minister May on Brexit if she rules out a no-deal exit. The Prime Minister continues to search for a last-minute exit deal, but has shown little sign of compromise.
But if the government remains intransigent, if support for Labour's alternative is blocked for party advantage, and the country is facing the potential disaster of no deal, our duty will then be to look at other options which we've set out in our conference motion, including that of a public vote.
In Greece, Prime Minister Alexis Tsipras managed to defend his agreement to normalize relations with Macedonia. With 151 votes in favor from a total of 299, Tsipras overcame a motion of no confidence and avoided the need to move the planned general elections to an earlier date. The Prime Minister will submit the agreement reached with Macedonian Prime Minister Zoran Zaev to Parliament. Both leaders hope to definitely bury the historic dispute over the legitimacy of Macedonia's name. After the Chinese probe Chang'e 4 made history by successfully landing on the far side of the moon, China announced further space exploration. The country will send another probe to collect lunar samples and even launch a mission to Mars in 2020.
Launched early December 2018, China's Change4 probe landed on the dark side of the moon on January 3rd. The spacecraft is composed of a lander module and a rover for exploration.
This will be the first time that we will be able to study the origin and geological formation of the far side of the moon.
Shortly after landing, the rover sent the first images of the Aitken Basin back to Earth. It is an immense crater that is 2,500 kilometers in diameter. From here, the international scientific community believe the probe will be able to collect data on the evolution of stars. Amongst other objectives, Change4 mission includes analyzing the terrain and detecting the mineral composition and the structure of the lunar surface. China also hopes to launch the Change5 to bring lunar stone samples back to Earth later this year and send a Chinese astronaut to the moon by 2030. They also want to send a rover to Mars in 2020 and another one to Jupiter by 2029. And with an annual budget of about $2 billion, these plans seem plausible.
The Chinese government need to have an open mind about exploring the moon in subsequent stages. This way, we will be able to develop a set of methods to conduct more in-depth research. We welcome any international social or industrial contribution that would bring us more funds to support this mission, which is a collective mission for the whole of humanity.
Having begun in 2004, the CHANGE program has carried out 4 missions to the moon so far and plans to send 5 more probes to further deepen the scientific knowledge of the Earth satellite. The international scientific community has acknowledged that the Chinese probe's landing on the far side of the moon was a historic achievement. China launched its first satellite into space 40 years ago. As their latest advancement in space takes a more scientific angle, the United States is making plans for a special space force, which will be the 6th branch of the armed forces. President Trump has said the U.S. presence in space is not enough, but as for China, their mission remains scientific for now.
A positive technology story to end this news brief. But you can find these and many other stories on our website at telesurenglish.net. For our viewers in Africa, we are on StarSat channel 461 in South Africa and 539 in Nigeria, and we're on social media as well. For Telesur English, I'm Carla Gonzalez. Thank you for watching.